My name is Michael Connolly, and this is the record of what happened during my honeymoon with my wife Alicia. This trip was supposed to be our perfect escape. We chose a remote tropical island known for turquoise waters, white sand beaches, and a sprawling resort that boasted every modern luxury imaginable. We had no way of knowing that our arrival would coincide with a sudden wave of illness and unsettling hostility from the local population. What began as a romantic journey quickly turned into a struggle for survival, overshadowed by encounters with zombies and an ominous alert that announced an island-wide lockdown. If anyone finds this account, please remember that even the most picturesque places can hide unimaginable dangers. Alicia and I are not celebrity travelers or thrill seekers. We are two ordinary people who met at a local animal shelter in Seattle. We first bonded over a stray Labrador mix that refused to eat unless we both sat on the floor beside it. Weeks turned into months of volunteering together, and by the time that dog finally found a home, we realized we never wanted to part. We got engaged on a rainy November day, and the wedding was small, just family and a few close friends. For our honeymoon, we decided to go somewhere warm and exotic. Alicia loves the sun, and I love exploring new places, so a remote island resort sounded perfect. We chose a destination that promised serenity, outstanding service, and isolation from stress. I remember watching Alicia's expression as our plane approached the single, narrow runway on the island. She was excited and nervous at the same time, fiddling with her wedding ring as she watched palm trees sway in the distance. When we arrived at the airstrip, we were greeted by resort staff with leis and bright smiles. The airport itself was modest, just one building with peeling paint and an outdoor seating area. A woman in a crisp uniform introduced herself as Celia, our assigned liaison. She explained that the resort had recently upgraded its security and health screening protocols, but there was no need to worry. Alicia and I glanced at each other, puzzled, but we trusted Celia's reassurance. The rickety van that took us to the hotel felt like an adventure in itself. Palm trees passed by, rustling in the wind, and distant mountains rose like silent guardians over the coastline. Back then, we had no clue about any danger. Yet I noticed something peculiar. On our way to the resort, we passed a few locals who seemed to stare at the van. Their expressions were neither friendly nor curious. They looked more guarded, as if we were intruders. Alicia squeezed my hand but said nothing. We assumed it was just a different culture, or maybe that tourism had disrupted their everyday lives. We could never have imagined how much deeper their unease went. Our destination was the Sunset Lagoon Resort, a sprawling complex that included multiple pools, restaurants, and a large central lobby filled with gleaming marble floors and tall tropical plants. The staff lined up to greet us, offering fruit-infused drinks while a steel drum band played on a raised platform. Everything appeared charming. The only oddity was the number of uniformed security personnel roaming the grounds. Alicia was instantly captivated by the beauty of the place. She ran over to the giant windows in the lobby that overlooked the lagoon. Schools of colorful fish could be seen near the shore, and a small boat was anchored a short distance out. Staffers explained that boat tours were available, as well as scuba diving lessons. It seemed too good to be true. The lush surroundings, the mouth-watering aroma from the beachfront grill, and the warm sunshine made it feel like we had truly stepped into paradise. Despite the gorgeous scenery, I recall feeling a fleeting sense of unease. Beyond the resort's manicured lawns stretched the island's dense jungle. Occasionally, I spotted local workers dressed in worn clothing, avoiding eye contact. At the time, I brushed off these observations. Honeymooners are supposed to focus on each other, not on suspicious details. The resort staff's hospitality made it easy to push aside any concerns. We never questioned why there were so many security checkpoints, or why multiple resort employees wore face masks, even when they weren't cooking. We settled into our enormous suite on the 28th floor of Tower B. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the ocean. Alicia wanted to watch the sunset that very evening, so we freshened up, changed into casual clothes, and headed back downstairs. We strolled along the beach, hand in hand, feeling the cool sand beneath our feet. A few other couples and families wandered about, but the shore was mostly empty. That night, as we got ready for dinner at a seaside restaurant, we heard a strange announcement over the hotel intercom. It was difficult to make out the words, but phrases like health notice and temporary restrictions drifted through the crackly speakers. Alicia tried calling the front desk to ask about it, but the line was busy. We decided it was probably a routine health protocol or something related to the local authorities. Little did we know how serious it actually was. On our second day, we woke up early to explore more of the resort. Alicia was keen on trying a guided hike through the island's interior to spot exotic birds. I was more interested in a snorkeling session near the coral reef. We compromised by signing up for both, but before we could leave, the lobby was thrown into chaos. We were standing by the concierge desk when two security guards sprinted across the polished floor, speaking urgently into their radios. A manager tried to keep onlookers calm, insisting there was a minor situation in one of the guest wings. No official statement was given, but from the fragments of conversation we overheard, it sounded like someone was unwell in a very alarming way. Alicia nudged me. "This doesn't sound like a standard medical case," she whispered. We saw staff members wheeling a gurney toward the elevators. A couple of them wore gloves and goggles. Another staffer seemed visibly distressed, repeating something in the local dialect to a supervisor. The tension in the air was undeniable. Despite the unsettling vibe, the front desk insisted everything was under control. They recommended that we proceed with our scheduled activities. Perhaps foolishly, we accepted that reassurance and went on our guided hike. The van ride to the trailhead was quiet. Our guide, Jonathan, was a soft-spoken man wearing a resort polo shirt. He told us about the island's history, focusing on the natural wonders. Alicia loved hearing about the different bird species and medicinal plants. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that Jonathan was uneasy. He kept glancing at his phone, and at one point, he lowered his voice and mentioned a recent illness that had swept through parts of the island. Supposedly, it resembled the flu, but had much more drastic effects. He quickly changed the subject when he noticed we were listening closely. During the hike, we came across a run-down hut near a small waterfall. Jonathan tensed up as we approached. He told us to stay back, but Alicia was curious and took a few steps forward. Through a gap in the wooden slats, she spotted an empty interior, littered with old clothing and scattered papers. We thought it might be a caretaker's cabin that had been abandoned. But what made Jonathan so anxious? We couldn't see anything inside that suggested immediate danger. Still, he insisted we move on. By the time we returned to the resort, we noticed more security vehicles near the entrance. Alicia suggested we check on the situation in the lobby. That was when we noticed the staff had put up hastily printed signs that read, "We regret to inform guests that certain parts of the hotel are under temporary quarantine. Please remain calm and follow staff instructions." Alicia and I exchanged a worried look. We had read about quarantines in other parts of the world, but not here, on our supposed paradise island. The staff still refused to give us clear information, and it struck me that some employees were as frightened as the guests. We heard more whispered references to an outbreak, an infection, something that was spreading quickly. On our third evening, we decided to stay in our suite rather than roam the resort. We ordered room service, and Alicia attempted to contact our families back home. The wireless signal was sporadic, and phone calls kept dropping. It was during this downtime that we first heard the emergency alert on television. A sudden beep cut through the regular programming. The screen went black for a moment, then displayed a stark warning in red letters. Emergency alert, island lockdown. The broadcast was partially in the local language, but an English translation scrolled along the bottom. The text indicated that a viral threat had been identified, urging everyone to remain indoors and not attempt to leave the island. Travelers, it stated, should follow instructions from local authorities. At that moment, I realized how deep our predicament was. We were locked onto an island with an active outbreak. The screen switched to live footage from a local station, showing medical personnel in protective suits. They were transporting individuals on stretchers. Some people on those stretchers moved in unnatural ways, as if they had lost normal coordination. The broadcast cut off abruptly, replaced by a static screen that displayed the word quarantine. Alicia's face reflected the same tension I felt. We both knew that quarantine was not a trivial matter. We tried calling the front desk for an explanation, but the line was clogged. I must have tried 10 times before giving up. We decided to see if any staff member on our floor could tell us what was happening. When we opened our door, the hallway was deserted, its lights flickering. It felt like stepping into a surreal dream. We ventured toward the elevators. An out-of-breath security guard spotted us, waved his hands, and whispered urgently that we should return to our room. "It's not safe," he said. He looked genuinely upset. Alicia asked what was going on, and he only shook his head. "The virus makes people different. Stay in your room. Lock the door." We tried asking for details, but he sprinted off toward the stairwell before answering. We spent that night in uneasy silence, occasionally checking the TV for updates. The emergency alert repeated every few hours, encouraging compliance and warning everyone about travel restrictions. Alicia decided to pack a small backpack with essentials in case we had to move suddenly. Bottled water, some snacks, a flashlight, and a change of clothes. I rummaged through drawers for anything else that might be useful. We found a first aid kit in the bathroom, but no real medical supplies beyond bandages and basic medications. At one point, close to midnight, we heard an odd sound outside our door. It was a low moan or groan. We hesitated, unsure if we should investigate. Then came a sudden thud against the door, as though someone had stumbled into it. Alicia grabbed my arm. We spoke in hushed tones, not wanting to attract attention. We waited, listening for any more sounds. Eventually, the noises faded. We decided not to open the door. I tried to rationalize that it could have been an injured guest trying to find help. Yet the memory of how that security guard warned us to stay inside made us think twice about stepping out into the hallway. The following morning, we realized we couldn't just remain in the suite indefinitely. Water still ran from the taps, but we didn't know if that would last. We resolved to find more information and gather supplies. Shortly after sunrise, we carefully made our way down the corridor. The elevator was out of service, so we walked down the stairwell. On the 20th floor, we encountered a pair of guests who looked disoriented and exhausted. They said nothing, merely glanced at us before continuing upward. Neither Alicia nor I could gather the courage to speak to them. Something about their expression seemed vacant. We eventually reached the lobby level. The once lively space now resembled an abandoned set. Couches were overturned, and a faint smell of something foul drifted through the air. Broken glass from a decorative vase crunched underfoot. We spotted a half-eaten tray of food on the reception desk, swarming with insects. Soft overhead music played on repeat, an oddly cheerful tune that clashed with the eerie stillness. We discovered that the main entrance was barricaded. Tables and chairs were stacked to form a makeshift barrier. A hand-painted sign hung on the wall, "Do not exit, virus present." We maneuvered around the furniture, peering through the tinted glass doors. Outside, the once pristine courtyard lay scattered with luggage and abandoned carts. No staff members were visible. In the distance, we saw figures staggering along the sidewalk. They did not look like normal pedestrians. Their movements were stiff, uneasy. Alicia let out a quiet gasp when one of those figures turned toward us and pressed a hand against the glass. Its eyes were vacant, as if it was guided by some primal instinct. We both recognized that we were looking at a being that no longer followed normal human behavior. It was then we realized we were dealing with zombies, individuals who were affected by the outbreak and no longer acted like themselves. We had heard stories, watched movies, but to see something like this in real life was unsettling. Without using any overly dramatic expression, I can only say it felt surreal. a moment that split our existence into before and after. We also became aware that some local islanders wanted nothing to do with tourists. We saw graffiti near the lobby exit, scrawled hastily, "Go home." The phrase repeated in multiple sections of the lobby walls. At first, it confused us. Didn't they realize that we were locked down and couldn't leave? Then we recalled the way certain islanders glared at us from the moment we arrived. Perhaps they blamed outsiders for the infection, or believed that the presence of foreign travelers had brought this viral threat to their shores. Creeping through the corridors behind the main lobby, we heard voices. We followed the sound and found a group of 5 staff members gathered around a desk piled with supplies: flashlights, batteries, canned goods. They fell silent the instant they noticed us. One of them, wearing a manager's badge, stepped forward and demanded to know why we were wandering around. We explained that we were simply looking for help. The manager introduced himself as Mr. Ramos. He looked at us with guarded eyes. His colleagues stood behind him, one of them carrying a heavy flashlight like a protective baton. Mr. Ramos told us that a viral outbreak had spread rapidly throughout the island, causing severe changes in behavior. Those infected were dangerous. He stated that many locals had grown suspicious of tourists because early cases were rumored to have started in the resort district. Although no proof existed to confirm that rumor, the damage was done. Misinformation circulated quickly, leading to anger toward visitors. We asked if there was a plan to evacuate the island. Mr. Ramos shook his head, explaining that all flights had been suspended. The local government had imposed strict travel bans. Even the hotel staff were stuck with no way to leave. He warned that venturing outside the resort grounds was unwise. The infected roamed the beaches and roads, and local residents were blocking routes to the airstrip. According to him, the resort was still relatively safe if we remained inside certain sections. He then told us about a small staging area where uninfected individuals were gathering resources and trying to communicate with the mainland. Before we could ask more, an older staffer motioned for silence. We heard footsteps echoing from a nearby corridor. We froze. 2 figures staggered into view, silhouettes lit by flickering ceiling lights. Their arms hung limply at their sides, heads angled unnaturally. A staff member pointed a flashlight at them. I saw their faces were marked by an unsettling, distant look. They fixated on us immediately and started moving faster, as if drawn by our presence. Mr. Ramos directed everyone to back away slowly, but those figures advanced with stiff motions. A younger staffer, possibly in panic, aimed a fire extinguisher at them. We all recognized that these were zombies. Their eyes had the same vacant glare we saw outside. The staffer sprayed a burst of foam, temporarily obscuring them, and shouted for everyone to run. We followed Mr. Ramos around a corner and barricaded the door to a maintenance hallway. The muffled sounds of fumbling persisted on the other side. We found ourselves in a cramped corridor filled with cleaning supplies, boxes of linens, and a single flickering overhead light. One of the staffers was trembling, repeatedly asking if they had locked all the doors. Mr. Ramos tried to calm everyone, insisting that we must stick together and move to the safer wing of the hotel. Alicia asked if there were other tourists around. Mr. Ramos replied that some had already joined other groups, while others were barricaded in their rooms, too afraid to venture out. The outbreak had spread so suddenly that the entire resort was in disarray. The group led us to an employee-only elevator that was still functioning. Inside, Mr. Ramos pressed a button labeled "Restricted Level." The elevator groaned as it descended 2 floors below the lobby. When the doors slid open, we stepped into a cold concrete corridor lined with pipes. The air felt stale. Eventually, we came upon a large storeroom repurposed into a temporary shelter. Over a dozen people were there, some resort staff, a few local residents, and several guests. Many looked anxious and exhausted. The group had collected supplies like bottled water, dry snacks, flashlights, and batteries. A single television set was placed on a table at the front, muted but displaying the emergency broadcast channel. One of the staffers tried to fiddle with the antenna, hoping for new information. Every so often, the same alert text appeared on screen, urging everyone to stay indoors, warning them not to approach infected individuals, and advising them to watch for any signs of illness. Alicia and I chose a corner of the storeroom to settle in. People offered us blankets and introduced themselves. Some explained how they ended up here. A local fisherman had been on the resort grounds to deliver fresh seafood when the lockdown started. He mentioned that the roads outside were completely blocked by barricades, and that armed islanders patrolled those barricades to stop anyone from leaving. His voice carried a note of resentment toward tourists, yet he seemed willing to cooperate with us under these dire circumstances. That night, I barely slept. Alicia rested her head on my shoulder, and I stayed awake, listening to every muffled sound that drifted in from the corridor. Every shift of the overhead pipes or distant clang of metal kept me on edge. I knew we couldn't remain in a storeroom forever. Sooner or later the supplies would run out, and the infected might discover our hideout. Come morning, Mr. Ramos pulled me aside. He asked if Alicia and I would accompany 2 staff members on a critical supply run to the resort's main kitchen. The storeroom had limited resources, and the kitchen's large refrigerators and pantries might hold enough food for everyone until the authorities arrived, if they ever did. Alicia insisted on coming along as well. She reasoned that she could help carry supplies. We joined the staffers, Emilia and Jorge, and carefully left the shelter. Jorge carried a lightweight crowbar for prying open doors. Emilia had a small radio clipped to her belt, hoping to keep in contact with the shelter. We used the employee elevator again, stepping out onto a service hallway near the banquet rooms. This area was normally bustling with servers and chefs. Now it was eerily quiet. We passed through a corridor lined with silver trolleys and stacked dishes. The air was stale, and the only light came from the emergency bulbs overhead. Just as we reached the massive double doors leading to the main kitchen, we heard a scraping sound. Alicia spotted a figure near one of the industrial freezers. It looked unsteady, half-crouched, wearing what appeared to be a chef's uniform stained with dried residue. The figure rose slowly, turning to face us. Emilia covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. The chef's eyes were vacant, lacking recognition. He was among the infected. Our group remained perfectly still, hoping he would lose interest. Instead, he moved closer, drawn by our presence. Jorge raised the crowbar defensively. A distant moan echoed from somewhere else in the kitchen, suggesting there were more zombies nearby. We backed into the corridor, not wanting to engage. The chef zombie advanced with uneven steps. Alicia spotted a side door labeled dry storage. We maneuvered past scattered utensils, trying to keep a safe distance. The infected chef reached out with slow, deliberate gestures, but we managed to slip into the storage room and shut the door behind us. Jorge quickly wedged a metal chair underneath the handle. We heard a dull thump on the other side, but the barrier held. We stood there, hearts pounding in silence, careful to avoid any loud exclamations, as the sound of scraping continued for a few minutes before fading away. Inside the dry storage room, we found crates of canned vegetables, rice, pasta, and bottled water. It was enough to help the group survive for at least a week, maybe more. We filled our backpacks and any spare sacks we could find. As we prepared to leave, we heard multiple footsteps outside the door. Emilia tried the radio, whispering for instructions, but we got only static. The possibility of encountering more than one infected individual made the situation incredibly tense. Eventually, the footsteps receded. With a silent gesture, Jorge eased the chair away, and we slipped into the corridor. We avoided the main kitchen area, taking a separate service route that looped back to the banquet hall. By some stroke of good fortune, we didn't encounter any more infected on our return trip. When we reached the elevator, we discovered it was no longer powered. With no other choice, we made our way down the emergency stairs, one slow step at a time, carrying as many supplies as we could. Back at the shelter, people greeted us with relief, and we divided the supplies. The sense of temporary triumph was overshadowed by growing tension. The fishermen muttered about how tourists always took resources, while a few guests complained about the islanders' hostility. No one could fully trust each other. Under better circumstances, maybe cooperation would have come easily, but this was a crisis that fed on paranoia. We also learned that a few individuals from the shelter had ventured out to seek a rumored evacuation site on the north side of the island. None had returned. The fishermen guessed that local checkpoints probably intercepted them. Another staffer worried that they might have encountered zombies in the deserted stretches of road. With no communication from the outside world, uncertainty loomed over us. Alicia tried to keep morale up by suggesting that we organize a watch system. She reasoned that if a few people stayed awake in shifts, we could detect any infected presence early. That plan was accepted, though some grumbled about it. At least it gave us a semblance of organization amid the chaos. 2 days later, just as we were starting to adapt to our new reality, an incident shook everything. While on watch, a young local villager named Teo spotted movement on the security monitor. There was a camera feed that showed a corridor outside the storeroom. The static-filled screen revealed a group of 5 or 6 individuals, their forms unsteady, drifting through the hallway. Teo alerted everyone, urging silence. We quickly realized those people were zombies. Whether they had found the shelter by chance or followed some trace of human activity, they were clearly heading our way. Lights were dimmed, and we gathered what makeshift defenses we had: kitchen knives, metal rods, and a few heavy objects. The group of zombies gathered at the storeroom door. One of them began ramming it, producing muffled thuds that echoed through the concrete space. A wave of dread came over us, but we tried to remain quiet, hoping they might wander off. Time dragged on as the dull pounding continued. Some members of our group looked ready to panic. Finally, the pounding lessened, and the figures outside seemed to shuffle away. We heard their footsteps retreating down the hall. Once we believed it was safe, Mr. Ramos led a small team to check if the corridor was clear. What they found was unsettling. The walls were marked with dark streaks, and footprints trailed across the floor, as if the group had been searching for any way to get inside. At that moment, we fully understood that the infected were not mindless in the usual sense. They appeared driven by a singular motive, scanning every nook and cranny for uninfected individuals. That night, tension reached a boiling point. Some in the shelter demanded that the tourists, my wife Alicia and I included, leave the storeroom. They insisted that foreigners were the cause of this crisis, that we would attract more danger. Others argued that we should band together, that it wasn't our fault this virus had spread. Mr. Ramos intervened, stating that driving us out would achieve nothing. The fisherman, whose name we learned was Kalani, glared but said nothing more. Days blended together. Alicia and I tried to keep track of time, but the routine of huddling in a storeroom with periodic forays for supplies dulled our sense of normal life. The resort's building-wide announcements had ceased entirely. Power fluctuated, making the shelter's overhead lights unreliable. At times, the hum of the backup generator kicked in, casting a faint glow. Other times, darkness swallowed the corridors. During a brief moment of electricity, the emergency broadcast channel on the television flickered back to life. This time, a message scrolled across the bottom of the screen. All evac operations suspended. Citizens advised to remain in secure locations. Local populations have enacted region-wide lockdown. The words confirmed that no rescue was coming anytime soon. We felt alone, cut off from the outside world. Despite the tension, small acts of kindness persisted. A staff member offered Alicia a spare jacket, noticing she was shivering in the cold storeroom air. Another person, a tourist from Europe, showed me how to rig a simple alarm system using metal cans and string near the entrance. We found glimmers of humanity, but the overall mood was grim. One afternoon, after a sleepless night, Mr. Ramos announced a possible way to leave the island. He said there might be a supply boat anchored offshore. He had overheard radio chatter indicating the crew was still out there, waiting for an all-clear signal that never arrived. If we could reach the boat, perhaps we could convince the crew to take us away. The problem was that the shoreline was crawling with zombies, and the local villagers set up blockades, wary of anyone attempting to escape. Mr. Ramos asked for volunteers to venture beyond the resort walls to the beach on the far side of the lagoon. The plan was to signal the boat using a high-powered flashlight from the pier, then make a dash to the vessel if it drew close enough. It was a massive gamble with no guarantee. Alicia grabbed my hand and asked me what we should do. Staying in the storeroom offered no long-term solution. The boat plan sounded risky, but it was our only hope of returning home. After a quick discussion, we decided to join the group planning to attempt this escape. A handful of others came forward: Emilia, Jorge, a couple named Luis and Kiana, and a local guide named Eno. Kalani the fisherman refused to join, muttering something about how the boat crew would never take outsiders. Mr. Ramos couldn't come along because someone needed to keep order in the shelter and continue caring for those who remained. He handed us a map of the resort grounds, pointing out a maintenance gate that led to a secluded path toward the lagoon's far side. Our small group gathered what supplies we could carry. We had a flashlight strong enough to use as a signal. We also brought water, some snacks, and the crowbar for any locked gates. We said goodbye to the people in the shelter, uncertain if we would see them again. We moved carefully through dim corridors, staying vigilant for any sign of infected activity. The route took us past guest rooms, a pool area, and an outdoor bar that was now eerily silent. Furniture lay overturned, and half-empty glasses cluttered the bar top. A short distance away, 2 empty lounge chairs sat near the edge of the pool, as if the people who occupied them had simply vanished. At one point, we passed by a massive window that overlooked the resort's central courtyard. Through it, we saw a small group of zombies. They wandered aimlessly between palm trees, occasionally bumping into each other. It felt like looking at another reality. Their expressions were distant, yet they seemed constantly searching. We crouched low and continued onward. We eventually reached the maintenance gate Mr. Ramos had mentioned. A heavy padlock secured it, but Jorge managed to pry it open with the crowbar. The gate squealed in protest as it swung open, revealing a narrow path flanked by thick undergrowth. Eno, the local guide, took point. He carried a large machete, which he used to clear any tangled branches. Along the path, we noticed footprints in the soft soil, suggesting others had come this way. We wondered if they had made it, or if the zombies had intercepted them. The path opened onto a secluded portion of the beach, far from the resort's main strip. The sand was littered with debris, broken surfboards, scattered beach towels, and abandoned sandals. The waves lapped the shore with an unsettling calm. In the distance, we saw a small pier, an old wooden structure that extended into deeper water. Alicia and I exchanged glances. This was it. If the boat was out there, we had to signal it. Emilia switched on the high-powered flashlight, aiming it toward the horizon. We all looked for any sign of a vessel. For a long moment, there was only silence and the sound of gentle waves. Then a faint flicker of light appeared far out at sea, as though someone was flashing a signal in response. Our excitement was short-lived, as a new sound emerged from behind us, a series of uneven footsteps. We turned to see a group of zombies emerging from the tree line, drawn by our presence. Some were dressed in resort uniforms, others in casual tourist attire. Their movements were disjointed, but their focus was entirely on us. Jorge and Eno stepped forward. We had no desire for confrontation, but there was nowhere to hide. The beach was open, and behind us lay only the water. As the zombies advanced, Eno brandished his machete, and Jorge held the crowbar at the ready. The rest of us clustered together, scanning the perimeter in case more appeared. A tense standoff followed. The infected individuals approached with slow determination. Eno shouted at them, as if trying to scare them away, but they continued forward. One of them lunged for Jorge, who sidestepped and swung the crowbar, We tried to avoid any direct engagement, but the confrontation was inevitable. Alicia clutched my arm, and I could feel the fear radiating between us. Suddenly, a distant horn sounded from the ocean. The supply boat was drawing closer, responding to our signal. But the zombies were now dangerously near. We had only one choice: push through them and run for the pier. Eno led the charge, clearing a path with measured swings of his machete. We wove around the staggering figures, always mindful of keeping distance. Emilia and Kiana nearly tripped in the sand, but Lewis helped them up, and we all kept moving. We reached the rotting wooden pier, which creaked under our combined weight. The boat was indeed heading our way, a small vessel with a single deck. Someone on board flashed a light at us, but they hesitated to get too close to the shore. Perhaps they feared running aground. We shouted that we needed help, waving our arms and the flashlight in unison. Behind us, the zombies followed, stumbling onto the pier as if they had no sense of personal danger. The boards beneath them groaned ominously. One of the creatures caught up to Jorge, grabbing his backpack strap. He yanked free and hurried onward, the crowbar slipping from his grasp. Eno kicked at the boards behind us, trying to dislodge or slow down the infected, but it made little difference. Desperate to reach the end of the pier, we rushed forward. The boat was now only yards away, its engine idling. A figure on the deck, presumably the captain, called out something we couldn't fully understand. The language barrier was an obstacle, but we guessed they were telling us to jump or swim to the vessel. Alicia squeezed my hand. We looked at each other for a brief moment that felt like an eternity. Then, without further hesitation, we jumped into the water along with the others. The waves immediately soaked us, and for a few seconds, disorientation took over. When I surfaced, Alicia was beside me, coughing but still conscious. We paddled toward the boat, where crew members extended poles or ropes to pull us aboard. Several zombies tumbled into the water behind us, thrashing aimlessly. Their vacant expressions were the last thing I saw before a crew member helped me climb the ladder. Once on deck, Alicia clung to me. Jorge, Emilia, Lewis, and Kiana were pulled up as well. Eno followed, water streaming off his clothing. We had made it onto the boat, but our ordeal was far from over. The captain and his crew were locals who spoke a dialect we barely understood. They checked us for any signs of the infection. We tried to communicate that we were uninfected, that we just needed safe passage. For a tense moment, the crew debated, pointing at the island and then at us. Their expressions shifted from wary to resigned. They likely realized leaving us on the shore would mean certain danger. Eventually, they turned the boat away from the island, heading out to sea. Alicia and I stood near the railing, watching the coastline shrink in the distance. The resort towers that once looked so majestic now appeared haunted, overshadowed by the knowledge of what was happening there. We wondered about Mr. Ramos, Kalani, and the others we had left behind. We wondered if any rescue operation would ever reach them, or if the island was destined to remain under quarantine indefinitely. We faced an uncertain future. We were cold, exhausted, and had no idea where the boat was taking us. Yet for the first time in days, we felt a fragile sense of relief. If we were lucky, we might find help on another island or on the mainland. But the memory of those vacant eyes and the desperation in that storeroom would stay with us forever. So ends the story of our honeymoon turned nightmare. My name is Michael Connolly, and I speak these words in the hope that someday they will serve as a warning. A postcard-perfect paradise can conceal hidden terrors. It's possible that the virus and the zombies that roamed that island were just the beginning of something bigger. If you ever come across a similar tropical getaway that promises endless sunshine and carefree fun, remember what happened to us. We left for our honeymoon dreaming of palm trees and blue waters, never expecting to encounter a zombie outbreak or the mistrust of locals driven to desperation. Wherever this vessel carries Alicia and me, we carry the lessons of our ordeal. Even in the face of panic and suspicion, ordinary people can find ways to help one another. Yet the cost of survival often leaves scars deeper than any physical wound. For now, we drift on these open seas, guided by the faint hope that somewhere out there, normal life still exists. And if it does, perhaps there is a chance we can rebuild what was torn apart on that island, a place that once looked like a honeymooner's dream, but will forever remain in our memories as a symbol of an outbreak that no one saw coming, and a lockdown that sealed us inside an unfolding nightmare. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.